In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your front lower control arms. I will only be showing you how to replace the driver's side because that is the more complicated side, and you'll see why. But on the passenger side, it's the same procedure, a little bit easier. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel, 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. Take the wheel off. So in order to get this driver's side control arm out, we actually have to lift the engine up so that the bolt at the front can slide out. So to do that, we have to unbolt the engine mount that sits here, which is actually the transmission mount. And then I'm going to go one step further and loosen up both front and rear mounts to give me enough room. In order to get to the transmission mount, we actually have to remove the battery tray, and move the airbox out of the way. So start by removing this brace for the battery. This is just a J-hook here. So to unhook it, you just push it down and sideways and it'll come out. Then use a 10mm socket. Remove the negative battery terminal first. Loosen up this nut that clamps it down. Once the terminal's loose, pull it up and move it out of the way back here where it can't make connection. And we'll do the same to the positive. That way we can completely remove the battery and get it out of our way. Remove the battery. Remove the battery tray, which is just a plastic piece that sits down there. And as you can see, this is the engine mount that we're after here. Now you might not have to remove the airbox because as you can see, there's plenty of space here. However, the only reason I want to do it is so that I don't put pressure on this intake hose here because it is old and brittle and I don't want to break it because the engine will go out but the airbox will stay attached. And also I want to make sure I have enough clearance underneath it. So it's optional, but I recommend it. Then let's loosen up this clamp. Be careful with these. As you can see, I already sprayed it with some rust penetrant, but these break often. Use a 10mm socket to loosen that up. Now let's unclip the clips that hold the top of the airbox in. Pop that out. I'm not going to remove it completely. I'm just going to set it aside over here. Remove the air filter. This is a good time to check it and inspect it. Looks like it's pretty clean except for some leaves, so take those out of here. Inside the airbox, there are 3 10mm bolts that hold this down. Remove all 3. Now you can simply lift this up and out. The air inlet pipe is attached here, but this just pops off as you twist it out of here. Okay. Now we have a lot more space to work with. Remove this wiring harness. It just has a little clip here that you can pry up. Now to make things easier, I just want to unbolt the 4 14mm bolts that hold this bracket onto the frame rail. And that is because if I do this, the engine will still sit here. As you can see, it's curved around and I don't have to support anything. Whereas if I unbolt the center bolt, which yes, it's only 1 instead of 4, it's going to want to drop down. Then I have to line everything back up. So personally, I think this will be more efficient in the long run. I'm going to start with the 2 up top. And then there are 2 on the sides. And the last one is on the back side over here. Okay, this one's unbolted. Now from underneath, let's loosen up the front engine mount. This is the one that sits underneath your fan. And there are 2 14mm bolts that go up through these 2 holes. That's it, that's all that holds that on. I'm just unbolting it off of the frame here so that it can still have an area to sit on and it'll just go up as I raise up the engine. 14mm bolts. And let's do the same to the engine mount in the back, which is that one right there. You can't see a lot of it, but this is one of the fasteners. This is another one, and then 1 through each of these holes. Also 14mm for all of these. Now I'm going to take a pull jack. Of course, if you're on the ground, you would just use a regular jack. And I want to emphasize on the fact that I'm using this rubber pad. You can use a piece of wood if that's what you have, but definitely do not put a steel jack or pole jack or whatever you have right up against this, because this is aluminum and you have a high probability of damaging it, whether that's chipping it or worst case cracking it. So just pay attention to where you jack up. And of course, don't jack up in the center of your transmission oil pan. That would completely cave it in. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to keep going up until I can clear this bolt. And that's it right there. That's all we needed. Next, there are 3 17mm fasteners to be removed, 2 nuts, and 1 bolt. Okay, move the ball joint to the side. Let's take the front bolt out, 19mm socket. Now for the rear bolt, you'll see that the bolt comes through the bottom, and at the top there will be a 19mm nut on the subframe that you'll have to hold with a wrench. You can either go in from the front or from the back side to hold that in place. Before we do anything on the top, let's just try to break it free from the bottom. All right, so it's broken free, it's spinning. Now, again, we just have to hold the top. At this point, I'm going to lower the engine back down, and that is because my axle is still attached, and when the engine is up like that, the inner CV joint is actually at a more severe angle, and I don't want to separate the joint when I move this around. So in order to give it a little bit more wiggle room, I'm going to lower this. Try to pry, but be gentle. Don't damage things. All right, there it is. It's all a matter of where you can pry and what angle you pick. And now take the new one, and this will be a little trickier just because this bushing is going to be straight up and down, whereas the old one was kind of formed downward in the same orientation as the control arm with the suspension. So use a rubber mallet and try to tap it in. I'm going to try and stick a 3/8 extension in through this opening here and get it into the control arm hole, because it does fit, and this is going to help me basically pull the bushing. Okay, bushing's pulled through. I'm going to actually put this bolt in at this point, that way it doesn't fall back out, and then we'll maneuver it to put it into the front. I put some grease on the shank of the bolt. I tried to avoid getting it on the threads, but I wanted to make sure that it doesn't seize up in there. To get this thing started, we'll do the same thing, except I'm gonna have the extension on my impact gun, and as soon as it moves around, just be careful of this area here. As soon as it moves around enough, I'm gonna thread it in. Okay, well, I pushed the nut off, but that's okay. We can get that. All right, so we'll come back to this, leave it as is. Let's line up the front. Okay, once you get it in there, take a rubber mallet and just tap it through the rest of the way. Raise up the engine again so we can fit the bolt through. Slide it in. With the control arm here maxed out upwards, it's basically at right height. So I'm going to torque this bolt. The torque for this is 101 foot-pounds, same for the other one in the back. Okay, I'm trying to start it on by hand, that way I know it doesn't cross thread. And yep, it just started. Perfect. So let's hold it with the breaker bar or whatever you use to hold it. Once you have it bottomed out and snugged, you can remove your tool from up above, because that nut actually has little teeth that basically bite into the metal that it's sitting on, and it prevents it from spinning for this purpose, so that you can torque it without having to hold it. 101 foot-pounds for this one also. Now we can once again release the engine and set it down onto the engine mounts. Now let's get the ball joint back onto the control arm. Try to move the ball joint in a way in which it will line up once it goes through one bolt. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Put the two mounting nuts on, and if this one lines up, put it in now. If not, sometimes the ball joint is slightly offset, and that bolt you'll have to wait until these are tight to put it on, but looks like for me it lines up, so let's tighten them. The torque for this is 66 foot-pounds on all three fasteners. Let's put back the two mounting bolts for this front mount. Make sure you start them by hand so they don't cross thread. Bottom these out and torque them to 38 foot-pounds. Now let's reinstall the mounting hardware for this rear mount. There was a mounting nut over here on this stud, and then two nuts going through these holes, and then the bolt going through this hole. Let's snug these all up and torque them to 38 foot-pounds. Now it's time to put these bolts back. I'm going to start the ones underneath first because they line up the best. And then for these, I'm going to have to just lift up on this bracket a little bit. They line up, but because the weight of the engine is pulling it down, I don't want it to cross thread. We'll bottom out the two top ones first, and then we'll put those in. This one I can't torque, so right off the bat I'm just going to take a long wrench and make sure that it's nice and tight. The rest of them I'm going to torque to 47 foot-pounds. And that torque would have applied to this one too if I could, but like I said, I can't get to it. Those are all tightened down. Let's put the lower half of the air box in. Make sure you connect it to this intake duct that comes out of the fender area. Clip it in, line up the bolt holes, and let's put the bolts in. Make sure this is nice and secure and doesn't wobble around. Put your air filter back. Make sure it's facing the right way. You don't want the dirty side up so that all the dirt would be sucked up into the engine. Obviously, put the dirty side down. Put back the top of this, slide it back into the intake ducting here. Make sure you line up these tabs here. If you don't line these up, the airbox will not seal up, and you'll know because you won't be able to clip these in. And if you force them and close them like that, well, you'll have issues where air gets drawn in. Tighten this clamp up. Okay, make sure that's nice and secure. Put back the battery tray. It has an arrow indicating the front of the vehicle, so make sure you put it in that way, because this little notch has to line up with the support underneath it. Otherwise, this will move around, and that would not be safe. There we go, just like that. And now let's place the battery on top of that. Reconnect the battery. Do the positive first, then the negative. Now let's tighten up these clamps. Try not to over tighten these, but as long as your terminal doesn't move around, it's good. And do the same to the negative. Nice and snug, doesn't move. Let's put the battery hold down bracket in. This J-hook at the back, make sure you hook it into its hole. And at the front, put the front bolt in. Let's tighten both of these down. I like to tighten the front first because this one you just tighten until it's bottomed out. And you do your adjustment on this one where it can basically pivot higher or lower depending on how tight you need to clamp this. Obviously don't crush the battery. As long as it's snug in here and it can't move around, you know you're good. If you have one of these covers, cover up the terminal. Now let's put the wheel on. Put back all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then torque them to 76 foot-pounds. And double check them. There you go, take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.